Folks, thank you so much for having me and bearing with my late schedule running. And I had a talk in another track which overran a little bit, and it was a lot of questions, which is always good. So I'm grateful for your patience, and thank you for having me. My name is Masih. I am an engineer in protocol labs. I have worked in two domains really in PL, content routing and now content onboarding. I've had the privilege to work with excellent engineers to build this thing we call IPNI. And here I want to talk about how does it relate to retrievals, retrieval incentives, and what gaps there are, if any, and more than anything, I would love to hear from you. So in this talk, we're going to cover what IPNI is, IPNI from an SP perspective, storage provider's perspective, and IPNI from retrieval incentives perspective, and IPNI from all these things working together. So I've put this talk together to talk about things from the perspective of users of IPNI rather than IPNI as an isolation. I think that's a more useful way of framing IPNI. So with that in mind, we're going to dive into what is IPNI. IPNI is a content routing system. Given a CID, it tells you a provider that has it, along with a bunch of metadata. Why is it significant? Why is it not just IPFS-DHT? Well, this is a system that is built for huge scale. So right now, the system is handling about 3 billion hashes per day. This is the sort of scale that we expect from large data onboarding, for example, storage providers that have a lot of information. So this is a lookup system that is built and tailored for providers of data in mass. The other thing to point out is that there's an instance of this running right now, which you might have heard of. It's called sit.contact. Sit.contact is just over a year and a half years old. In fact, in Brussels, it's just 10.1. And this is the same service that is now built into systems like Boost by default, Kubo by default. So it's been a really long journey, but a really fruitful one in terms of solving content routing problem in this domain. In terms of IPNI protocol itself, I want to quickly touch this because some of these actually matters in the context of retrieval. The way that IPNI structures information about what is true is by creating a chain that captures diffs of information. Do I have laser? Oh yeah, look at this, excellent. So IPNI creates a chain of information that captures diffs. So I added 2 hashes, I'm going to remove 3 of them, add another 4. And this entire data structure is an IPLT node, if you like. So there are links to other entries, which capture lists of hashes, and this chaining is essentially used as a way of chunking data. The key distinction to make about IPNI is that in IPNI ecosystem, it is the provider's responsibility to maintain this chain. This chain is signed by the provider, and it should serve as the source of truth on what it is that they're providing. You have another components in the system which simply consume this chain and turn it into a mapping mechanism. And this mapping mechanism is then exposed over a simple REST API for lookups, the likes of which are integrated into Kubo. But the main thing from SP, ISP, from retriever's perspective is that the onus is on provider to maintain this chain about what is true. And the indexers are responsible for ingesting that chain and obviously creating a mapping that corresponds to it. IPNI itself stores information in encrypted way. So this mapping that you see here is a logical mapping. In fact, on disk, this simply looks like a typical key value store with random bytes. But a logical mapping exists a bit like a relational database where you have this concept of foreign key, if you like, we call value key, that maps to providers that provide the same multi-hash. So IPNI from an SP perspective, what does it mean? IPNI today is being integrated in Lotus. It's been integrated in Boost since its inception. About 40% of storage providers on Filecoin are now index providers that are compatible with IPNI protocol. Sid.contact right now has just over 700 unique storage providers that are contacting it. And it has indexed over 33% of all the data that is uploaded on Filecoin. Right? That is no small feat. In fact, I had to change these numbers today because since I created the slides, which was last week, these have increased by quite a bit, especially the daily thing. On daily basis, 62% of all the deals that are made on Filecoin get indexed by IPNI. So if you're making a deal with Filecoin and storing your data, the chances are you can find it on IPNI. On the graphs, you see the changes over time. Obviously, this fluctuates depending on characteristics of the network, indexers, and so on. That should give you an idea of how significant IPNI is in the Filecoin world. From retrieval incentives perspective, so what does all of these technology mean for somebody who's building, who cares about correctness of retrieval? Right? When we talk about IPNI, we're talking about a single source which tells you what the SP told the network, right? So when we are really talking about how IPNI relates to retrieval incentives, it really breaks down to how we establish some sort of attestation, right? Informing of attestation, that's where IPNI comes in. So the first thing you need to do as builders of retrieval incentivization is to understand what is true, right? So what happens is, from a content consumer perspective, what we are really looking for from the system is, am I getting the content that I want back from the storage provider? And from the SP perspective, the question is, am I serving what I say I have, right? So you can imagine how the IPNI network fits in. IPNI network captures what the SP say they have. You can then imagine external systems finding out what the SP said, and that's where actually retrieving it, and that's where this whole attestation idea comes in. I'll put this bottom light bulb thing at the bottom. I think the stuff that is happening in the retrieval incentive is also useful in the context of incentivizing indexing itself. I think we are starting to see a birth of an end-to-end ecosystem, if you like, which is quite exciting. So that's one of the things I want to point out, because when we're building retrieval incentives, we should build a system that not only cares about its immediate concern, but also cares about the wider ecosystem that enables it to measure this immediate concern, and that is indexing itself. So where are the gaps here, right? What are the things that we want to focus on in the context of building this attestation, IPNI, SPs, and so on? I've listed a number of gaps here, which I'm going to go through. I'm going to start with enabling attestation to begin with. Right now, the indexing that exists in IPNI, if you remember my previous slide, it maps a hash to provider information. But when we are forming an attestation, what we want is really a reverse mapping of that, right? I want to verify if a provider is saying or providing what it's saying is providing, and that means I need a reverse mapping of that. That reverse mapping doesn't exist today. Though the data exists on disk, the data exists in IPNI, but it's not indexed in that way. So one of the gaps today is to enable that lookup mechanism, which then enables attestation to be formed or performed, right? The other gap that I want to highlight is this feedback loop. So we're talking about systems that may be running in the network, periodically or on a deterministic random seed. They will try something out, but there's also a flow of retrieval itself. How can we create feedback loops from the system itself to then tell the system that, hey, the thing that I was going to get really didn't work for me, right? there is an opportunity here, right? We need to create these feedback loops that reduces the burden of having to explicitly check everything every time by a dedicated system. Obviously, we want a mixture of both, but the key thing to highlight here is that there is an opportunity. And the other thing is this conflicting idea of privacy versus attestation, right? When we are talking about attestation, we're talking about finding out whether a CID was available, downloadable, and so on, right? And that inherently assumes that the CID is publicly accessible, especially if you're talking about a swarm of nodes going and checking if a CID is retrievable, and that is inherently conflicting with privacy, right? There's an unsolved challenge here, right? More specifically, in the case of IPNI, because all the records are encrypted, from server perspective, there is no way of knowing what is the actual CID that's being looked up. That's another challenge right there. For us to be able to produce CIDs to a checking system that then checks the retrievability, we need to know what the CIDs are. Whereas IPNI so far has concentrated on creating a system or a protocol that is that disallows or does not enable the indexer node itself to snoop on what CIDs are actually being looked at, right? So there's something to unpick here. And the last one, I'm not sure, actually, there's one more. There is this idea of hearsay, right? So far, we're talking about one of the most popular instances of IPNI, which is running on sid.contact. If we are building a decentralized interconnected network, then there shouldn't be a singular most powerful whatever. It really should be a federation of nodes that work together, not just because of decentralization principles, but also because of the increased confidence. So having a single source from which we can get information from would weaken this confidence that we would have in retrievability of data, right? So what we really want from IPNI perspective is multiple instances of IPNI that work together, provide information, and more importantly, instances that can agree with each other. So a federated network that could eventually produce the same lookup table, if you like, given the same source of information, right? And that is reasonably non-trivial. This is one of the things that we need to solve in IPNI world. And another one, which is I want to find a really good way to phrase this. So we are talking about a system that involves exposing information about the data that is stored by SPs, right? That is there is certainly a non-zero amount of effort that happens by SPs in order to expose this information, right? What we want to provide is basically a way by which we could enable SPs to control how they advertise information which fits their business model best, right? Because at the sort of scale that we're talking about retrieval, these small tuning knobs starts to matter, because that's where the differences between a profitable and non-profitable SP, for example, comes from. So right now, there's just one way of advertising. It's all built into like SP mechanism. I think we need more tuning knobs there that allows different models for advertisement, things that are, for example, agnostic of the way by which data was prepared, for example, right? That's another topic of discussion. So this is the sort of gaps that I had listed for you. I hope that kickstarts a discussion about what the system should do in terms of enabling retrieval incentives. I personally think retrieval incentives is a key in solving a lot of the problems, especially in terms of enabling data flow. So from a maintainer of IPNI perspective, I want to make sure that the protocols or the roadmaps that we're building is actually tailored towards achieving that goal. And it's really difficult to get a good idea without speaking to folks like yourself. So I would love to hear from you. Do you have any questions or suggestions?